how did you find Tony Blinken's speech at the UN? It seems that the US foreign policy is so weird like now. Nobody can get it. What's wrong with the Tony Blinken's foreign policy?
Well, it's a stretch to call it a foreign policy. It's a Zionist policy as far as Israel is concerned. And, he sort of let the cat out of the bag. Now, everyone recognizes, everyone who's aware, that there's a strong Zionist influence on U.S. relations with Israel. Almost all of our ambassadors, almost all of the people on top of the State Department and people dealing with the Israeli-Arab dispute have all been of Jewish extraction. And but they didn't usually brag about it, It was just sort of understood. Okay. So it was hard to understand for me, but understood. Okay. And then Blinken goes to Israel and says, now, besides all this, I'm a Jew, I'm a Jew. And so, so this can be an honest broker, right? Or what happened to that role? What happened to the role where Palestinians had one good side to explain, well, the Israelis with the others, okay. And what happened? Well, it's just gone by the board. And for Blinken to say, well, I'm a Jew, as though that's relevant here. Well, unfortunately, it is relevant. And it's a big mistake because Palestinian rights exist also, okay. And if you have an unbiased person like Blinken, you have a person who on Sunday told Meet the Press, or I guess it was Face the Nation. He said, look, there's not going to be any ceasefire, no ceasefire, no pause in the bombing so that we get hostages out. No, that's not going to happen. No. Our whole effort here, we are focused, is the way you put it, on ensuring that the Israelis achieve their military objectives, period, end quote. Wow. So the Israelis are conducting, well, let's not be polite, it's genocide. It's defined very specifically in international law. There have been cases where countries have been accused and convicted of genocide, like Yugoslavia, okay, other countries. So genocide is happening here, and the Israelis are doing it. They're killing civilians left and right, and what's happening is Blinken is saying, well, what the Israelis want to do, we're focused on, that's his word, we're focused on seeing that they are able to do it, okay? Now, what's different? The old Russians, the Soviets, they used to talk about the world correlation of forces, okay? There had to be a balance, communist world against the Western world, okay? And it was very careful. You had to really kind of make sure that you understood that. Well, guess what? The correlation of forces has shifted. What would be amusing, or not to be so tragic, is that when the U.S. accuses Russia of being isolated now, I mean, it's ludicrous. I mean, who was isolated last week when there was UN vote simply for a ceasefire in Gaza? Who was isolated? Well, there was only one no vote, and that was the U.S. 12-1 with 2 abstentions. That doesn't tell me that Russia's been isolated. It tells me that the U.S. has been isolated. Now, what does it come down to? It comes down to a lily white West personified by NATO. Look at NATO. What's one distinguishing characteristic of NATO? Well, they all look sort of like me. They're all white, okay? The Turks are sort of a blend, but they're as close as you get to people of color. So it's the lily white West, the collective West. They don't say lily white against the rest of the world, for God's sake, okay? Now, the rest of the world, vast majority happens to be people of color. China, India, Indonesia, Brazil, Iran, South Africa, okay? Russia, okay? Russia is sort of a bridge there, but there are many people of color there, and they've been blackened so much by Western media that they're people of color de facto, okay? So is that a healthy situation? Under no circumstances is that a healthy situation. How does that apply to the situation now in the Middle East or the Southwest Asia, if you will? Well, Israel may have a big, big patron in Washington, but it's got nothing else. It's got these puppets that dance to Washington's tune in Europe, but they don't matter in this equation. What matters? Iran matters. Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Morocco. These people matter. Saudi Arabia matters. Are they sympathetic to what the Israelis are doing? No. Are they going to do something to stop it? I don't know. But this is the first time where I would say chances are probably that they will. What will that unleash? A regional war, and it could lead to world war. So this is important? Yeah, it's really important. Is Blinken able to understand this? I don't know. Is his boss, Biden, able to understand this? No, clearly, no. I mean, he still thinks, to the degree he's compass mentis, that the U.S. is the exceptional country of the world, that Madeleine Albright was right in saying that the U.S. is the indispensable country of the world. Now, you know, I often wondered whether Joe Biden really believes that in this day and age. And I had a hint about that 6 weeks ago when someone wrote up a meeting. He had a small social gathering with people in Maine, the state of Maine, where he ad-libbed and said, you know, I really admire Madeleine Albright. She came up with this idea of the unipolar world, the exceptional world, the world that just is really led by the United States, okay, the indispensable world, okay? Now, I said, wow, that's interesting. So he says that in private too. Maybe he really believes that.
Joe Biden tweeted that we are the indispensable nation on the earth. He tweeted that.
Well, that's right. You see, so I thought, well, in this private setting, I said, well, that's curious because he didn't have to say that. He could have said, you know, I say we're indispensable, but I know we're just one power in the world. But no, he really believes that. So as you just said, Nima, he said that in a major speech. We are the indispensable country in the world. And whom does he quote? Madeleine Albright. And what is she famous for? Well, she helped Bill Clinton enlarge NATO, despite the promise not to. She helped institute these sanctions against Iraq, under which 500,000 Iraqi children under the age of 5 died. And when she was asked by Leslie Stahl, a prominent correspondent, when she said, now, Madam Albright, that 500,000 Iraqi children under the age of 5, they died because of the sanctions? Do you think that was worth it? And instinctively, Albright said, yes, we think it was worth it. Worth it. Okay, so this is the person everyone knows said that. And so here's the rest of the world watching this thing. And the only actual conclusion would be that our president doesn't have a really good idea of what the world has become. It may have been way back after World War II, or maybe even after the fall of the Soviet Union. You might have been able to say we're the indispensable country of the world then. You can't now. And the president of the United States doesn't realize that. When I talk at universities, I have a little fun with this indispensable thing, you know. I asked them, do you know what a synonym is? And usually they say, oh yeah, we know that's a similar word. Yeah, right. Now what's an antonym? Antonym. Usually there's one college goes, oh, I think that's an opposite word. Right, it's an opposite word. So what's the antonym to indispensable? Dispensable? Yeah, that's right. So if we are the sole indispensable country of the world, what does that make all the other countries by definition? Dispensable? Yeah, yeah. Do you think they like that? No, they wouldn't like that. Think it's true? No, it ain't true anymore. So how do you suppose they're going to react? Well, they're going to react in a way that countries have never been able to do before against the United States, and it's all coming to a head in this ethnic cleansing, this collective punishment, this genocide, and Gaza, and you know, unless somebody stops it by some major stroke, it's just going to come to what the Chinese used to call, it's going to come to a no good end for everyone. And so my prayer is that someone will wise up and say, look, Mr. Biden, it used to be so, it ain't so anymore. Blinken doesn't realize it either. So you have to get an adult in the room so you can kind of devise a smarter policy. Otherwise, you know, those carriers out there in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf, they're going to be hit by whatever drone or whatever frogmen or women decide to hit them. Are they going to be sunk? No. But are they good targets? Well, think about a soccer field, okay? These aircraft carriers are 3 soccer fields long, you know. Targets, you know, I think I could hit those targets if I were trained to do to run a drone. I mean, without any training, I probably could. So they're sitting ducks. And if Biden doesn't realize that, well, he's got to have a comeuppance. And the Chinese, as well as Saudis and all the other people I mentioned before in the Middle East, are getting together now in a way that is very dangerous, because it's going to say, no, you can't do this anymore, United States. Blinken, you're really not understanding the real correlation of forces. It's changed. There's no longer an equilibrium. It's the lily white West against the rest of the world, and that redounds very poorly to U.S. interests.
When you look at Israel, do you see any long-term strategy on their part? They started supporting Ukraine against Russia. Now they're attacking the people in Gaza Strip. And it seems that it's making more hatred, more divisions between Israel and Arab states.
What I find most interesting, Dima, is the Russian attitude toward Israel and Ukraine and so forth, and Gaza. Now, what the Russians are trying to do is maintain enough balance so that they could be actually playing the kind of honest broker role that the U.S. tried to play or made believe it was playing for the last several decades. China, for its wisdom, is much more engaged and much more vocal in support of the Palestinian rights. That's not to say that the Kremlin doesn't feel the same way. It does say that they're being reticent and they're being very reluctant to get embroiled in such a way that neither side would say, well, you can't help but get two sides together. So that's my impression of how the Russians are playing this game. Now, with respect to Israel, It's very, very complicated. I don't have to tell you that. But one aspect that is not very much talked about, but is, in my view, very important, is that Netanyahu has a personal stake in all this. He could go to jail, very simply. If he loses power, if he doesn't cooperate with these very, very hard right people that he's been acquiescing and joining his government, if he doesn't kowtow to them, then he could be lost. I mean, he could be removed from power, and they've got the goods on him. And so he's got a personal incentive to pursue this thing. And no matter how tragic it gets for the Palestinians and others, okay? Now, sometimes those personal stakes mean a lot. And I think in this case, in Netanyahu's case, it does. The other half of the equation is, so too does Biden have a personal stake in this. And I'll just mention that he too could end up in jail. This sounds strange to my American friends, but the evidence is coming in now. Bribery, bank accounts. Biden boastfully said, "Show me the money," about the money he's gotten from various foreign partners, Ukraine, China, whatever. And now they're showing him the money because they've traced the bank accounts, his brother and his son and so forth. So it's not only Hunter Biden, the son, but it's President Biden that could be impeached. If the Republican candidate comes in and decides to put Biden and son in jail, well, that could happen. Even Blinken, he's the one that inspired these 51 very high-level intelligence agency managers to say Hunter Biden's laptop smelled bad, that it bore all the earmarks of a Russian intelligence disinformation operation, right? Right. So we know by court testimony that it was Blinken that got this little toady that used to work for John Brennan to round up these 50 others and have this. And then right before the election, when Biden was debating with Trump, Trump raised this. So what about this? What about Hunter Biden's laptop, which shows not only the scurrilous behavior, but bribery and all that stuff? Joe Biden rose to the occasion and he said, 51 intelligence managers, some of them CIA directors, all say this is a Russian intelligence operation. Now, when was that? If memory serves, maybe 10 days before the election. Now, did these operatives know better? Well, all they had to do was ask the FBI, because the FBI had a laptop and it didn't bear any earmarks of a Russian intelligence. It is what it is, okay? They didn't do that. So is there an argument that Biden, by the skin of his teeth, won the election with the help of this misinformation operation? Well, yeah, there's an argument. I don't know how you can prove that, but who is responsible for that? A guy named Tony Blinken. Is that illegal? Well, I hope it is. You're not supposed to do that kind of thing. And finally, this fellow, what's his name? Jacob Sullivan, who's the national security advisor. He's the guy that made up Russiagate. Russia hacking of the Democratic National Committee computers, Russia doing this, Russia doing that, all of it made up out of whole cloth, sold to our media as truth and bought by the media as truth for 5, 6, 7 years, okay? Sullivan's the guy that invented all that. So that's got to be illegal too, in my view. And on a more serious note, if you can be more serious, people in the United States have been so brainwashed, and I'm sorry, but that's the word. They've been so brainwashed on these kinds of stories about the Russians hacking into the National Committee, the Democratic National Committee. We know that's not true, because the head of the cyber firm that inspected those computers said, we found no evidence, no technical evidence of any hacking by Russia or by anybody else. The reason Americans don't know that is because the New York Times, Washington Post have suppressed that information. It's been out there for years now. The testimony was in December of 2017. What is it, 2023 now? That testimony has been suppressed. And again, the testimony was by the head of CrowdStrike, the firm that was hired to look into, to do a forensics on the DNC computers. And he testified on the 5th of December, 2017, that there was no technical evidence that anyone hacked into those emails. Now, the emails, remember, were so prejudicial to Hillary Clinton because they showed that she and the Democratic National Committee had stacked the deck against Bernie Sanders in such a way that he had no chance to win the nomination. And that's why it was so detrimental to Hillary Clinton. So that's why they were so angry about that. So they invented Russiagate. Sullivan, they invented these 51 leading managers of the CIA and other places. Okay, that's Blinken. And you've got Hunter Biden's laptop, and you've got people testifying now that, yeah, we know about where the money. When Joe Biden says, show me the money, well, unfortunately, we're going to show him money now. It's going to be very embarrassing to a person who was the vice president at the time, or even the president, to let himself be used as for paltry $10,000. I mean, for God's sake, corruption. Well, Ukraine may be the worst, but Washington is close second.
Biden is calling these funds that he's asking for Ukraine a smart investment in Ukraine. Why he's calling it a smart investment? What has happened to Ukraine that he's thinking that it would be a smart investment in Ukraine?
Well, in the most callous sense, Ukraine is famous for its black earth, which is as fertile as any other earth in the world. I've been there, done that. I took a trip from Moscow by car down to Yalta, through Ukraine. Every 10 miles, the agricultural attaché would get out and put his trowel in that black earth to see the level of moisture, to be able to estimate how the crop would be that day. This is 1972, okay? So I've been there, done that. This is so fertile a soil, okay? Who's going to own that now? Monsanto, other big agricultural firms. So in a very cynical way, oh, that's pretty good investment, because when all this peters out, assuming there is some Ukraine left, and I think there will be, who's going to own the real goodies? Monsanto and other major agribusinesses, okay? But the most distasteful thing, of course, is the notion that, look, this is an effort, as the president himself has admitted, to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. Look, we've killed maybe 100,000 Russians already. And how many Americans have died? Well, we won't count them. There may be 100 of them in Ukraine, but the U.S. forces, So very, very smart investment. What was the expenditure? Oh, about 500,000 other people, not Americans, other, Ukrainians. What were they doing? Oh, they're defending their freedom. Oh, defending their freedom. Well, how come they're losing to the degree that, why can't they stop? Well, because this is a really good investment, not only agribusinesses, but, we're weakening Russia. Now, this is delusional, because Russia has acquired all kinds of combat experience now. They've built up their army to be twice, maybe three times the size it was when this all started out. And they're not going to stop until they have created a buffer zone, which will protect the people who live in the Donbass, primarily Russian-speaking people, and give Russia what it had hoped for originally, namely a quiet area in the eastern part of Ukraine where Russian-speaking people are no longer shelled to the degree that they had been. Now, people don't know this, but after the coup in Kiev, where the US and NATO members unseated a duly elected President Yanukovych and put in these Russophobes who said the first thing, now we're going to join NATO, and now we will prohibit the use of Russian as a official language. That happened right off the bat, and what happened next was John Brennan, the head of the CIA, went to Kiev, and he gave them the word. There's not much publicity to this, but there's enough to show that he did go. He said, okay, go attack those people in the east, those people that don't want to put themselves under the coup regime. Go get them. And they started bombing them and then shelling them. And then there was an agreement because both sides were taking it pretty tough on the chin, right? So there was agreement worked out in Minsk in Belarus, okay? And in early 2015, they decided, okay, look, we'll have a ceasefire kind of line here, okay? And we'll have an agreement where those people in Donetsk and Lugansk, in the Donbass, they will be given a degree of autonomy within Ukraine, okay? Within Ukraine, okay? You would have to change the Ukrainian constitution, but that was the agreement. Who signed on? The French, the Germans, Poroshenko, the head of Ukraine, and the people in Donbass, Donetsk and Lugansk, okay? Now, what happened? Well, 14,000 casualties later, killings later, there was still no agreement. What happened? Well, what happened was this. Right after the coup in Kiev, when Putin and his associates realized that their only all-year-round ice-free naval base in Sevastopol, part of Crimea, that NATO was about to take that over if Ukraine joined NATO, as the coup leaders said they wanted to do. Well, Putin said, no, we can't let that happen. There was a plebiscite, and Crimea was subsumed into Russia. Now, the people in Donetsk and Lugansk who were equally opposed to the coup regime, especially since they were being denied privileges, like even using their Russian language in official documents, okay? They said, well, look, Mr. Putin, please, take us too. We'd really like, you took Crimea, please take us too. We'd like to become part of the Soviet, of Russia. And he said, no, there's a Minsk process. We're going to negotiate this thing, and we have an agreement. They're going to give you the kind of regional autonomy which will prevent the worst of the abuses. So be patient. We're going to work through Minsk. Now, what did he say? He said that in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. And what happened? No progress in Minsk, no change in the Kiev constitution, no regional autonomy. Instead, 14,000 shellings, 14,000 killings by shelling by Ukrainian forces. Now, people say, well, it wasn't all Russian-speaking people. Only about 12,000 were the Russian-speaking. Okay, let's take 12,000. Now, the codicil to all this is that in February of 2022, there was a major uptick in that shelling. On February 12th, there were about 50 shellings, okay? On February 16th, if memory serves, there was something like 500 shellings. And on the 14th, the 16th, 18th, and 19th, there were 1,400 shellings of the Russian-speaking people in Donetsk. Now, as you know, that was just days before the special military operation was launched. I happen to think it was one main reason why it was launched, because there are other indications that the Ukrainian forces were prepared to go en masse into Donbass and clean out, as they would put it, clean out those Russian speakers. So how about Minsk? What about the Germans? What about the French? Well, the most curious thing happened, Neem, I could hardly believe it. But in December of 2022, Angela Merkel, former Chancellor of Germany, she said, well, you know, the Minsk process, well, we just used it. We needed time to build up the Ukrainian forces, because in 2014, they really weren't able to do anything, 2015, but now look at them. Look at them now. We wanted to build up the Ukrainian forces. So really, it wasn't a serious negotiation. It was just to give them time. That was December 2022. Okay. Now, Hollande, Francois Hollande, who was the French president, said the same thing about a month later. And then Poroshenko said the same thing, and Zelensky. And it wasn't like, oh, you know, we're all ashamed of this, you know. It was, those Russians, they were so gullible, you know. Not only did they believe that smart Texas lawyer, James Baker, way back in 2000 or whatever, back in when they met in Moscow. But now they believe these other things. They just, you know, it's we got away with it, and we're proud of it, and we're gloat about it, and so, you know, so here's Putin facing the people in Lugansk, in Donetsk, and Moscow, saying, Vladimir Vladimirovich, so what gives here? You've been taken to the cleaners. They're laughing at you. Are you going to let this happen again? Well, unfortunately, it happened one more time. And that was in April 2022. Last year, okay? And what happened? Well, as soon as the special military operation began, the Russians and the Ukrainians said, oh, this is really bad. Let's talk. Let's stop this. This is crazy. You know, let's stop this. Okay. And they did talk. Where did they talk? Again, in Belarus. Okay. And then in Turkey. And then with the help of the former Israeli prime minister and with the Turkish prime minister. And they came to a deal. On the 31st of March, they initialed the deal, which would have called for no Ukraine in NATO, okay, a measure of autonomy for the Donbass, for Donetsk and Lugansk, a codicil talking about what kind of forces could be deployed. It was all worked out between Zelensky's negotiators and the Russian representatives. Okay, this happened. It was in Istanbul. Check with the Turks. They were there. They can verify it. So can the former Israeli prime minister. So what happened? Well, the U.S. said, nothing doing. This doesn't have to do with Donbass. Doesn't have to do with Ukraine. This has to do with weakening Russia, giving Russia a strategic defeat. So forget about it. We don't care what you initialed. You're not going to sign it. And just to make sure that this was personally driven home, they sent that puppet named Boris Johnson he was the head of the UK at the time. They sent him to tell Zelensky, look, fellow, you better not do this because we're not going to support you anymore if you do. And Zelensky, instead of saying, look, my responsibility is to my people. I don't want the Russians to be killing my people. We've got a reasonable deal here. I don't give a rat's patootie what you want to do to Russia. What were Zelensky's options here? I dare say that if he cared about his country, and if he recognized the correlation of forces here, if he was aware of what Obama once said, and that was, my God, never give the Ukrainians the idea that they could defeat Russia militarily. That would be crazy because Russia is in a much stronger position. If he recognized all that, then he should have said to Boris Johnson, look, Johnson, go home, tell your patrons there in Washington, I'm going to do the best deal for my Ukrainian people, which include Russian speakers in the Donbass. I've got a good deal here. I don't care about your campaign against Russia. I mean, I hope you succeed, of course, but don't make me a pawn in this, all right? I've got a deal. We're going to sign it. That could have ended the whole thing right then and there. Now, do we know about that agreement? Yeah. Putin waived that agreement for a meeting of African presidents, African prime ministers, and so forth. And here it is. Here's the initials. We had it going, and the West, the collective West, the lily white West, the West that has Zelensky as a little marionette, okay, it said no. Now, what does that mean? My God, that's awful. 500,000 at least Ukrainian young men, and some Ukrainians as old as I am, for God's sake, dead, okay? And Zelensky still dancing on the marionette thing, okay? So that needs to be brought out and needs to be asserted here, because unless Biden comes to his senses, he will be proven absolutely wrong in having stated 6 weeks ago the Russians have already lost, and his CIA director saying not only have they already lost, the ineffectiveness of the Russian military has been laid bare for the whole world to see. This is really strange, because just the opposite is the case. And in the next couple of months, we're going to realize that the Russians have the upper hand, and that the only question is how far west they will go. Will they go to the Dnieper River? I believe they will. Will they go farther? I don't know, but it will all depend on how the West reacts. And so far, it doesn't look good for a sensible reaction. The more so since Biden and the Democrats don't want to lose the election. Again, there's a personal stake in here. You lose in Ukraine, you lose the election. Worst case of all, you lose your fight for freedom, your personal freedom, you end up in jail. Now, I don't exaggerate, because if one of those Republican contenders comes into office, there's going to be a vengeance such as not seen in U.S. political history. There's a lot to be vengeful for, frankly, with Russiagate and all these other machinations. And so what I'm saying here is this makes the situation even more delicate, even more volatile. And I just hope that our armed forces are smart enough to realize that the correlation of forces has changed, especially with respect to Ukraine. And they shouldn't get involved in places where they where they really don't have a strategic necessity. And that goes not only for Ukraine, but for Gaza also.
We have this conflict in Ukraine and in Israel. How do these wars, these conflicts are affecting the relations between the Middle Eastern countries and between Russia and China?
Well, the most interesting aspect of this is the way Russia and China, and particularly China, has rallied around the Arab countries, Iran, and are supporting the notion that the Palestinians should not be given a genocide. Okay, I mean, genocide is as bad as it gets. The Israelis seem bent on perpetrating a genocide. Now, will it be bluster and rhetoric on the part of the Arab countries surrounding this area? Well, that's been the case in the past, especially with respect to Gaza, okay? Whether it's the same now is really an open question, and that's what introduces a degree of volatility to this situation, which we've not seen before. Now, let's say Hezbollah comes down from the north, invades Israel, or at least attacks some of those settlements to the north. Let's say Israel retaliates by trying to go into Lebanon. What will Iran do? Now, Iran has been less ambiguous than I would have thought in threatening to come in under those circumstances. I think they'd still be reluctant to do so. And the fly in the ointment here, the real joker card, although it's not at all funny, is the fact that Israel has nuclear weapons. Now, most people know that. Well, it's reality, it's a fact. Even some Israeli prime ministers have acknowledged that by mistake. So, what will the Israelis do if push comes to shove and their back is against the wall? I don't know. But for God's sake, sensible statesmen, stateswomen need to intervene right now before it reaches that point. And you may say, well, Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. It does not have a nuclear weapon, but it could very quickly. And it has an array of missilery, and so does Hezbollah, and so do a lot of the other countries, that they could wreak havoc on Israel.
Pakistan, Ray, Pakistan just said that if Turkey needs nuclear bombs, they can give Turkey to hit Israel. It's so amazing what's happening right now.
That's really amazing, as you point out. I'd have to see that to believe it. I know they've said that, but this is easier said than done. But it does show the degree to which people people feel the need to express solidarity with the people in Gaza. Now, there are 2 million people there. Now, when we talk about the Holocaust, genocide, most people say 6 million, 4 million. Most people say 6 million. Well, is only 2 million? Is that not a genocide? I mean, have we lost our humanity? Can we not stop this? Well, what needs to happen is somebody needs to intervene here and warn in a very tangible way. Look, Israel's not going to get away with this, and I don't know exactly how that can happen, especially with Israel and a nuclear weapon. So this is a challenge to statesmanship. Unfortunately, there's a dearth of statesmanship in this world right now, but the new elements are China, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Brazil. There are sensible people trying to tamp this thing down, hopefully the UN can play a constructive role here, because after all, Gaza, the West Bank, the Golan Heights of Syria, they were all sieged in a war of aggression. People need to remember that. 1967, the Israelis made up this story about being attacked or in the imminent fear of attack from Egypt, right? Wow, that was not the case. In 1982, former Prime Minister Menachem Begin, the Israeli, said publicly in Washington, it's in the New York Times, let's be honest about this. In 1967, Nasser's forces were not about to attack us. We decided to attack him. So we need to be honest about that. We saw this as an opportunity to attack him. Ha, 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 ha. Okay, that's 1982. Okay. What happened back in 67? I'll tell you what happened. The UN said this is a war of aggression. This is sort of like for Lebensraum. Sound familiar? What the Germans want, more territory, right? Okay. So we're going to have a UN Security Council resolution, unanimous, like everybody voted yes, okay? Israel must withdraw from the occupied territories. November 22nd, 1967, check it out, UN Security Council Resolution 242. Okay, it's a long time ago, but it's still on the books. It should be enforced. Right now, the balance of forces is such that it could be enforced. One fly in the ointment is Israel's possible use of nuclear weapons, but Israel doesn't want to be destroyed either. So there is a deterrent effect there. So why doesn't the UN live up to its duty and enforce that resolution? And why does it abide by one veto by the United States, which would prevent even just a ceasefire and a stop in the genocide that's going on now? Well, if the UN is worth its salt, if it's worth anything anymore, it has to rise to the occasion. And the good news is that both China and Russia, Brazil, South Africa, others still respect the UN, still give it the degree of respect that it should ordinarily receive. And so there's a chance that maybe, just maybe, even the General Assembly can get into the act. Maybe the UN can be a constructive role for peace, but it's got to be soon, because the genocide is underway. Another thousands of Palestinians perishing just today and as we speak.